You started in 2015. The only show he was doing at that time was the Ask GaryVee show. You've seen every iteration of content and how it's grown and changed. Talk to me about the team holistically and how it's evolved over the last 10 years.
I think the biggest thing that most people don't know about Gary is that
The biggest challenge you faced in working on this brand. Was there ever a time where you felt like you gave too much of yourself to the job?
I think I was always really good with it. Running Gary's brand is my fifth most important job. My number one most important job is one of the things that I've not done a good job of over the last 10 years is
started in 2015. The only show he was doing at that time was the Ask GaryVee show. You've seen every iteration of content and how it's grown and changed. So talk to me about, you mentioned like that's the thing that makes the team so special, but talk to me about the team holistically and how it's evolved over the last 10 years.
So when I started, the team was very flat structure. Everyone reported into Gary. Everyone had their own defined roles, but there was overlap, and Gary would communicate with the whole team on email. There was an alias that everyone would send in, Gary would send an email to, and everything was written in the subject line. And someone would respond and say, got it. And then the whole team knew this is the person that's taking over, and they're going to take forward whatever that task was. That was the structure of the team back in 2015. Over the years, I think the first iteration was Andy became the team lead, and then everyone was reporting into him because we were, I think at that time, 10 people. This is when probably you and I really started full time. Then we moved into a world where there's one leader, and then there's a second layer of leaders now, which is like the management almost. And then there was like the third layer of like everyone else. To then creating versions of now we have different almost units happening inside the team. And this is all a byproduct of how social media has evolved. Initially, if you think about it, back in 2015, one long form YouTube video, and if you cut it down, you can post the shorter versions on YouTube. The best thing you could do is probably post it on Facebook. And then an image from that would go on Instagram. That was the social media team. And most of the focus was on websites. Driving SEO traffic. Google search was the number one focus. Understanding Google Analytics. Understanding Facebook paid. Because at that time, 2016, Facebook paid has just started to like really cruise. And Vayner Media was now heavily investing into media simply because of how well we understood it. And now, 2025, Instagram has 7 different placements. TikTok has 4 different placements. YouTube has 5 different placements. Every platform is so much more than just the one asset you could post over there, one style of asset, and the amount of data that you have, the amount of information you have, the amount of creative tools you have that are like allowing you to make better content, because it's in every platform's favor that you understand what works and what doesn't work on their platform so that you make better content for them, so that once you make better content, people stay on their platform, don't leave, you spend more time on their platform. It is a win-win-win. It's gone from let's just use it as a publishing thing to now it's almost like it's a knowledge hub. And it's just completely changed the way you need to approach it. And it's not make a video, post it. It's first think about what video you want to make, how you're going to have the first few seconds, how's it going to flow, what's the end going to look like, what's your storytelling, how you're going to keep people hooked. But that's just one piece. How do you actually then pull in back to your first question of what is it to lead a brand? How do you actually bring everything back to the main brand? How do you actually use every small aspect of it to actually build the brand presence or brand awareness? And now I would say Team Gary is probably producing close to 1,500 assets a month. Versus at that time, we were probably, and I don't have this number, but if I had to guess, would probably be around 100, which was a pretty high number at that time.
What is part of the GaryVee content machine, as we'll call it, that most people don't know exists. So like, obviously Gary's this loud character. There's always like, thousands of pieces of content, and it's all this like real sexy like shit. But what's a part of the team that you've seen as being like brand director that most people wouldn't expect or see on the regular basis, but this, I'm sure, important?
I think the biggest thing that most people, I would say some of the big core fans of Gary as well, don't know about Gary is that he spends maybe 3% of his time making content. 97% of his time is spent running his businesses. And how Team Gary actually takes that 3% and makes it 100% of his presence on social media is really the magic that team does. It is misunderstood how much effort goes into that, especially when you don't have someone who produces shows specifically for product for social, or will have shoot days and things like that. There's a lot of information exchange that happens across multiple people and ideas and brainstorming and working through different creative aspects to bring all of it together, that a lot of times, because of the way Gary's content looks in the end, because it's very rough and raw and less polished than most other things on social media, that it's probably underappreciated how much work, time, effort, and knowledge goes into making one of the best brands on the internet.
Yeah. Whenever you say 1,500 pieces of content, I think that's so many, and it's tough to understand and grasp that. So just rattle off, like, what does a handful of Gary content look like that extrapolates to 1,500 pieces?
So the way that I think of it, the way that we define the 1,500 is every different placement needs a different style of asset, even if it's the same kind of messaging. So, for example, we're promoting a show that Gary's about to do in 2 days. The way that we're going to promote it in a community tab versus Instagram story versus a Facebook in feed versus a TikTok story, all of those assets, while they might look the same and have the same messaging, will be created differently to actually be created for those placements, so that they have the best opportunity of reaching the most people. So it's about creating assets that are native. So when we're thinking around that, it's taking a long form piece of content, making short form videos, making BSUs, as we all know it, branded status updates, making static images, making an audio only podcast, making TikTok first videos, making Snapchat spotlights, making YouTube shorts. Again, YouTube shorts is something that a lot of people are not thinking about when you say YouTube, but that's where we had the most growth in 2021. Instagram stories, when they were launched, everyone thought that Snapchat was going to die, but Snapchat's still here and is flourishing with Spotlight. So a lot of these platforms, while they are competing with each other, they've found their own niche of like how they survive. But like the assets created for every platform in different formats, similar messaging, are some of the things that I would probably define it as. I probably went a little circles in there, but I think it's videos, static images, stories, GIFs or GIFs, however you want to call it. The podcast, we now have video podcasts as well. Promos, right hooks, as we call them. A lot of that stuff, I would say. And then 8 different languages.
Yeah, tell me about that.
So one of the first real tasks that was given to me when I started full-time on Gary's Brand, and I think this is like GaryVee 146 or something like that, where we've documented this. Gary says, I want to be the most known entrepreneur all over the world. And one of the best ways to do that is to translate my content so that more people can see it. Like, got it. So our first focus was to tap the traditional and simplified Chinese market. And that's where mainland China and Taiwan were the first two places where we started looking for people that could help us do this. And that's actually how May actually came into the picture. She was one of the first people that volunteered to do it. And then she created some of Gary's content in I think it was simplified Chinese first and then traditional Chinese. And that's how we really started our global network of languages. Once we started doing Chinese, then we went into Spanish and Portuguese. And then there was a time when we were expanding into Polish and Malay and Hindi and Japanese, Korean. And at this point, we're down to just 8 where we actually have a good presence. And it's Chinese, Portuguese, Spanish, Hindi, Arabic, French. It's good, but I don't think it's as strong right now. And then
That isn't there like GaryVee Brazil.
that's Portuguese. That's the Portuguese one. But yeah, it's called GaryVee Brazil because that's the Portuguese spoken in Brazil. And again, those are not just one accounts. They're like, there's a whole brand around that where it's like Facebook and LinkedIn and YouTube and TikTok and Instagram.
Crazy.
Yeah.
What's been the biggest challenge you faced in working on this brand? Maybe it's professional, personal, like what is it? I very clearly know mine, yours, you know what I mean? And so I'm curious, what's like when you look back and you're like, this has been the hardest thing to deal with?
I would say the hardest yet the most fun for me has been staying on top of what's trending on social and always being the best at it, because Team Gary has to be at the forefront of innovation. We need to know what's happening and how we can react to that. So that can come in 3 different ways. 1, you're hiring the right talent that's at the forefront of it. 2, you're keeping your eyes and ears close to what's happening in culture and what's happening in platforms. And 3, it's really constantly, while the team is evolving, there are people that are growing, going into Vayner Media and becoming leaders, and people leaving and going and doing cool things like you, still building the next generation and next generation and next generation to like keep up with this, I would say is probably the hardest part of it, where it's almost a balance of building people and letting them flourish and go and do cool things, yet at the same time keeping the next generation as strong as the last one so that the consistency remains.
All right, let's talk about the 10 years.
What was your hardest thing? Because then we can reference it. Because
my hardest thing was actually not the work or Gary or anything like that. It was balancing personal relationships with the work. And so I spoke to D-Rock about this, and I was like, being back in the office recently to like shoot those daily Ds, I was like, bro, I felt like I was like 22 again, and I was just nervous and awkward. And even though I don't feel anywhere near the way I did then, I was like, I feel like I didn't know how to talk to people, and I felt like no one liked me, and I felt like I was being too competitive when I walked in. And so that was for sure the hardest thing for me. It was balancing like wanting to do good work and like be really productive, but also like maintain some sense of like relationships with the people I was working with, and try and like have friends at work and do good work. It was just something that was really, really challenging for me to navigate.
I can see that. Yeah. I think I historically have been good with like separating people from work. I mean, sometimes to a fault, but like still just, I like to talk to you as a human, but when I'm talking about work, I like to talk about your work, not you as a human doing the work. And I think that is one of the strengths I have, and definitely helped me over the last 4 years of leading the team. Like, I think there are people on the team that know how much I've been there for them. I actually have this text. I want to read this out because I have this text from, actually, I don't know. It's fine. I'll verbatim say it as much as I can remember. But this person texted me. I'm not gonna give timelines because then people figure out who it is and all that stuff. But there's two texts that I want to talk about. One said, "Thank you for giving 1% shit about me, because it meant the world to me at that time." And the other said, "When you hired me, you promised me that you will do anything to make sure that I advance in my career, and you did more for me in much shorter time than I could have ever imagined." And to me, I think I am that human that is always chasing excellence and the best. Like, I'm pushing people to the best, but I know that there's not a single human on earth that can say that I wasn't there for them when they needed me. And to me, I think that's the part of it. It's just like, there's work and then there's humans, and always separating the two when you're having those conversations is something you got to learn as you go on in life, because it is the most complicated thing, because ideally you'd all want to work with your friends, and that's where these are the most difficult conversations to have.
Yeah. Was there ever a time where you felt like you gave too much of yourself to the job?
I think I was always really good with it, because I feel like even in like the early generations, I would say like the first few years of my time there, like I always had more than just the work in my life. And I feel like, as someone who went from being single to dating to getting married with all of Team Gary at the wedding, to having 2 kids now on the team, I think I've done a really good job of balancing being great at my work, or at least I think I'm great at my work, and being great with my life outside of work, or at least I think I'm great at my life outside work. But just balancing those, and the way that I've always defined it is running Gary's brand is my 5th most important job. My number 1 most important job is to myself. Number 2 is to my wife. Number 3 is to my 2 kids. It was always 1 kid, now 2 kids. The number 4 is to my parents, and number 5 is Gary. And if I can have the first 4 in a good place, then it's really easy to do 5. And that's how I see it, and that's how I roll with it, and that's allowed me to like really do this for 10 years.
You set out to learn these skills week over week. Where do you think you learned this sort of approach to skill learning and organization? Was this like family business? You've always been this way? Was it a Gary influence? Like, most people, I don't think, would be diligent to be like, all right, I'm going to, instead of just doing I'll take whatever job is thrown at me, to say, okay, I'm going to dissect each part of this team and learn the ins and outs, I think is kind of a unique.
Yeah.
Where do you think that comes from?
I think growing up, I've always been like a very an all-round kid. Let's just say that. Like, I didn't have great grades, but I had them. They were good enough. I wasn't great at any sport, but I was good at many. I wasn't great at almost any skill that was out there. Like, I wasn't great at anything. I was always one of those people that was like good at most of them. So like, I could play any sport and I could be competitive. Now that I think of it, it's probably my competitive side that was always like, I want to be dangerous enough in any situation. And I think that's where like always being curious and accumulating skills along the way is how I've always been as a human. I would say that even when I was applying for my MBA here at Babson, I was really tactical with how I gave my GMAT. Like, I was working at Siemens at that time, so you had to be at work by 8:30 a.m. So every day for 3 consecutive months, I would wake up at 4 a.m., study for my GMAT 4 a.m. to 7 a.m., get ready to go to work from 7 to 7:45, leave home at 7:45, be at work by 8:20, 8:30, leave at 5:30, come home, go play soccer for like an hour, eat dinner, sleep at 9 p.m., regimented, and then wake up at 4 a.m. again next day and rinse and repeat. I did this every day for 3 months. only and only to give my GMAT, which was the thing that I was focused on, to then eventually be able to apply to B schools here in the US. And to me, like, I'm a very non-regimented person. Like, I'm probably the most comfortable with chaos, but I know when I want something, I can be very, very focused on it, to a point where I recently did a 5-day fast and I easily did it, versus I know that how complicated it is for a lot of people. And like, for me, I think that's like something that I believe I have as one of my skills, is like, I'm just competitive and can probably just figure shit out better than most people. I just don't know where I got it from, though. It's probably in my DNA.
What did your family think? Like back home, like they're like, you're working for this insane man in New York City. Whenever I was in the thick of it and people would ask me like what Gary did, I'm just like, he's this guy, he does stuff, what I mean? So like, what was it like explaining it to your family in India, who I assume is probably like very traditional in their ways?
I would say my parents were a little different than the average human in India, I would say. My parents always have backed me and believed in me and have let me do things my way. Like, for example, like, I was running the family business when I suddenly one day decided that I'm going to leave and do my MBA in a different country. Because my dad had gone into semi-retirement almost. Like, he was coming into work for he's a workaholic. He works 6.5 days a week. If he could, he would work 7. And going from that to him being in office for like a couple of hours every day was a big shift, because he could see that I'd taken the business over, and like, I was running it smoothly and it was flourishing. We had almost 3x the revenue in 2 years, and it was really in a good place. To then me suddenly announcing that I want to go and do my MBA, my parents were very supportive about it. They were like, cool, if that's what you want to do, we're here for that. So that happened. I come here. The game was, I was going to do it for 2 years, go back. The day that I actually shared with them that I was thinking of staying here for another year, because even at the beginning, it was like just 1 year. I was never thinking of being here for 10, but like just 1 year. I really got a lot of support from that side. I would definitely say that my dad was still like kind of disappointed, where like he was hoping that I'd come back to the family business, but there was a lot of support and openness towards, all right, let's figure it out. And then the 1 year became 3, and it became 5, and now it's almost 10, to a point where like there's almost a running joke with my friends that they're like, yeah, you're going to say you're going to come back next year, and you're going to say you're going to come back next year. And that's where we're at.
Why now start this podcast to just talk to me about what conversations you hope to have?
I think I now feel that I have the authority, let's say that, or the permission, or whatever you want to call it, to actually have these kind of conversations. I think if you ask me, one of the things that I've not done a good job of over the last 10 years is build my own brand. And I think this is a foray into, one, showing you behind the scenes of what it took to build the brand GaryVee that we all know today. And as I've always said, it's not about me. It's about all the people that I worked with. And to your point, there's few that stand out and they've really impacted in different ways. So how can I bring, one, their stories out, all the people that influenced what the brand looks like today, two, also humanizing some of the numbers behind the brand. Babin, a lot of people know Babin because Babin talked about his time on Team Gary. But I know people don't know Babin. I know people know of D-Rock, but do people really know D-Rock and his time on Team Gary? I would almost argue that most people identify Andy as someone who was on VFriends, but he led the team for 4 years and he has a lot of good stories he can share. It was Dustin's goodbye party 1 week ago, and there were so many stories that Andy and I were sharing about our times together, and I don't think the world knows them. And there's some good ones and there's some tough ones, but it's humanizing the people behind the brand, bringing more stories to light of what it takes to build one of the best brands in the world. And it's going to be called
WhiteSpace.